Hello everyone, welcome to the internally screening review of Eve's Bayou. My name's Adam.
My name's Rupert.
And today we're continuing Hooptober with this, one of 3 films featuring predominantly people of colour as either directing or starring. This is the 1997 family melodrama directed by Casey Lemons and starring one Samuel L. Jackson. It revolves around a family living in the swamps at the Bayou around Louisiana. It focuses on the children of a wealthy family descended from aristocrats. One night, the youngest girl sees her father, Samuel L. Jackson, having an affair, an illicit liaison with another woman, and so sets a trend of sort of uncovering deeper, darker secrets around the family's history and background, and leads to potentially devastating consequences. Rupert, what did you think of Eve's Bayou?
I enjoyed it a fair bit. I wasn't crazy about it, but what I will say is I really appreciated it for what it was, because I don't know what this says about me as a person, or whether this is a slightly weird thing to say, but I kind of expected this film to be about racism in some form.
Right, okay.
Like, just going into it, I just kind of assumed it would have something about that, because it's, something that's, super relevant and seems to be very prevalent in stories by black people, and written by and starring and directed by, but it actually has nothing to do with it. It's just a straight sort of southern melodrama with some kind of spooky stuff going on. I guess it does feel a bit out of place in Hooptober, given that it's barely a horror film at all. But yeah, I enjoyed it a fair bit, and I actually really appreciated that it was actually just a film about this sort of black family and these sort of interesting interpersonal machinations and strange voodoo rituals going on. And it was just completely straight up what it was. I think maybe my biggest criticism is it felt a bit soap opera-y at points. There's nothing wrong with that, but there were moments where it kind of felt its length, I guess. But it was actually, for the most part, really well acted, and a very, very good looking film. I wasn't mad about the soundtrack, but for the most part, just a really sort of solid, thrillery drama film with some really standout moments to go with it. What did you think?
Well, I mean, first thing, I completely agree on the racial component of it. I'm really happy to see, and it's kind of, I guess, fascinating to see a film featuring an almost entirely black cast. In fact, maybe it is entirely black.
I don't think there was any white people in it.
And for it to just be a sort of pure, simple family drama, I think that's really important in terms of normalizing the portrayal of people of color in cinema as not just the victims of racism, but as real people living real experiences.
Yeah, exactly. Because the only reason I brought that up, sorry to interrupt you, the only reason I brought that up is I just imagine it must be quite exhausting, where it's like, if you're a black person, you want to watch film with black people in it. It's like, what you just have to watch, like, it's not that many.
Yeah,
so it's like, you're just going to watch 12 Years a Slave? Like,
yeah,
it's
I know
a bit
what you
miserable,
mean.
isn't it?
There seems to be such a large majority of films, starring black people, inherently centered around the black experience and the more negative side of that experience, which obviously is very pervasive. So I understand why that is so, widespread as the sort of general topics of films. But yeah, this is just like a really, as tragic as it is, it's a strange breath of fresh air. Moving on from there, I'll say performance-wise, I thought the adult actors across the board did a really good job. Obviously, Samuel L. Jackson is class in pretty much everything he's in, apart from the odd action film that he's turned up for a quick check. But he clearly cares about this one, and he's very charismatic. He's a very sort of commanding, somewhat sinister figure at points. The women of the family, who are kind of more in command and more sort of the main focus of the piece, in spite of it kind of seeming every conversation seems to be around the kids and the husband, but then everything more centrally is around these two. They both do great. I like the backstory of how the sister is supposedly cursed. She's like into her supernatural stuff, and all her husbands keep dying and stuff. So I quite like, as a tangent, the supernatural element in the film. It's
quite subtle, isn't it?
It's subtle, yeah. It's subtle enough to the point where you could easily interpret the film as not actually having any supernatural qualities at all. Like, it's purely just like sort of internalized and a belief system of those characters. There's nothing too intrusive, everything can be explained away in various different ways. So I like that element of it, that ambiguity. But then with the child actors, I would say the lead, Jurnee Smollett, she was really good in some scenes and then really bad in other scenes. And I think there was like a consistent inconsistency, if you know what I mean. Like, especially if you ever needed her to cry or anything, she looked really... I mean, I know with child actors you do sometimes have to have like a different set of standards. Well, that said, I think in the good scenes she's really good. She's like she's very charismatic and likable. But there are just some scenes where I'm like completely taken out of it by her performance as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because like for most of the film she's really good. But there are like, it's kind of like those more sort of high-strung scenes where the cracks sort of show.
Yeah.
I feel bad like holding against it. I think like there's basically two main kid actors in the film, and she is probably like slightly better than the other one. But for the most part she's pretty good. But there are like a few scenes where it kind of seems like she's trying not to laugh. Or like there's just an awkwardness to it. But she does actually seem like a child, which I kind of appreciate. And I guess that's also partly down to the direction. Like when the kids are like out doing stuff, I kind of appreciated that it actually did kind of feel like they were acting as children would act.
Yeah,
as
doing
opposed
shit
to like
that they would do. Like, you know what? That's not something I really considered, but there was very naturalized writing of the children. It didn't feel like so many scripts where it's really obvious that a 50-year-old bloke has written lines for teenagers. You know, the classic Hollywood misstep. Now, this felt very naturalized. I like the bit where there's a point where her and her brother are like playing with what they think's a dead snake. Like, it's dead. Oh no, what if it's asleep? And then it starts like hissing at them and they freak the fuck out.
Yeah, they like run for like a mile screaming, which is quite funny. And then the follow-up bit where the brother like plays a prank on her, and you just hear him like screaming in another room because she's left like a toy snake that conveniently looks exactly the same as the snake they found earlier.
That's great.
And that was good.
That's so traumatizing. Another thing you mentioned earlier was you said you thought the film looked quite beautiful. I'm not 100% sure I agree with you. I think a lot of the locations look nice, although I wish they'd used more of, you know, Louisiana to me is such an interesting part of America. It's like such a unique kind of landscape. You don't really see much in sort of the built-up Western world of like swampland and bayous, and it's a sort of strange culture around it as well that's quite unique as well. Like there's just something quite sort of mystical and interesting about Louisiana, and I think we only got like a little sliver of it in this.
It's not very visually grandiose. It's not like beating over the head with landscapes like a Chloe Zhao or Terrence Malick film.
And not that it has to. I think it has a bit of a sort of stage play quality to it. But then even then in the cinematography, I just found it to be very flat and boring. Like it felt more like a TV film in its kind of presentation, which you kind of said, you alluded to when you said like it felt a bit soap opera-esque. I think
half agree with you, because I do think the film is like actually pretty well shot. There are some nice landscape shots, and when I'm talking about the visuals, I'm also talking about like the costumes and the setting and the sets. I think that all looks really like authentic.
Definitely authentic, no doubt on that.
And I actually think like there's a few scenes where I was really impressed by like the blocking of the camera. There's like quite a pivotal scene with the aunt where she's talking, and then the way the mirror is incorporated into this flashback
that was
that she
really
has.
good.
Yeah,
I really liked that.
That was like a really creative use of like blocking and melodrama, and it kind of is one of those like tricks that is so much more effective than just going to a straight flashback.
Yes,
and just
completely.
like showing it. It like really like feels more involving,
so much more.
And more intense. So I like it's stuff like that, and there were a few sort of clever moments like that. Though as the film goes on, I guess this is a very light spoiler. So if you're interested in this, I would generally recommend it. But this is like a very light spoiler. That there's kind of like an element of unreliable narration going on, right? Which the film sort of slowly builds upon. There's a few scenes revolving around that I thought were like very well like edited and well shot. So I think visually, I think it was pretty strong. I agree with you. Like when it comes to like the soap opera stuff, when it does lapse back into that kind of shot reverse shot stuff, it does become a little more by the numbers. But I think for the most part, it was pretty visually strong.
I would agree on the points you brought up, but I still just generally think maybe it's to do with color grading and lighting. I think sometimes the lighting was really nice. I just think it could have been a bit more crisp and interesting and vibrant to look at, especially given its location, and it just, especially sort of color-wise, felt very flat and ordinary. You know,
I think that's fair.
It didn't show off its exceptional setting.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I guess the only thing, like, it comes back to the fact that I feel weird calling this a Hooptober film, because it does certainly get more intense, and the sort of theme of the film. Should we go into spoilers? Because I kind of feel like
go into it.
Yeah, the theme of the film. There's sort of like this twist about Samuel L. Jackson's character, who you sort of quickly learn early on is not a great guy. He's, you know, cheated on his wife, and then as the film goes on, it seems pretty clear that he's quite openly cheating on his wife, and he's never really there. It's kind of like this open secret where his wife seems somewhat oblivious to it, but then like how could she not know, right?
To me it seemed more like she felt kind of hopeless about it, like because she was such good friends with the sister. And the sister was kind of like, oh, that's just what our family's like. That's how I've always been. That's how he's always been. And it's almost like kind of swept under the rug, like, oh, just get on with it.
To be honest, I think the film might take too long to get into that stuff, because that was by far, like, in the sort of, as the film was wrapping up, by far the most interesting stuff to me, because then you have this sort of like Rashomon style scene where one of the younger daughters says to the other daughter, you know, he once attempted to molest her, and then at the sort of very end of the film, after he's been killed, maybe by a curse, maybe not, it's revealed he's written this letter where he says to his wife, she kissed me, and I was so shocked by it that I pushed her away and hurt her, and I'm really ashamed of it, and I wish I could have explained it. And I thought that was like a really poignant way to end the film, and it was really interesting. But I just wonder, like, that kind of unreliable narration stuff, I mean, I kind of love that stuff, and I wish that there had been maybe a greater emphasis on it, and like more to do with that. Do you know what I mean?
No, I 100% agree. I think the film sets up, I think it's kind of bookended by the most interesting parts of it. It settles into a rhythm that kind of loses its sense of momentum and shape, if you know what I mean, and then it kind of regathers itself towards the end. And I do really like the ending, and I like the kind of foreshadowing, I guess, of the incident in which the elder daughter tries to kiss Samuel L. Jackson, because you see throughout the film, like at the beginning, she's like dancing with him, and the younger sister Eve is jealous that she never gets to dance with him.
Oh yeah.
And then she's always the first to defend the dad and kind of stop the other kids from like eavesdropping on conversations and things like that. There's this kind of protectiveness that becomes obsessive. And it kind of makes sense because he's like an absentee father that showers her with adoration and then is just gone. And I guess that kind of give and take relationship has kind of corrupted her young mind. And, you know, I guess in a moment of paranoid obsession, she tries to like claim him in a sexual way. And, you know, in a confused way as well, because she's so young, she doesn't fully understand her actions. I thought that, you know, it's like kind of horrifying, especially the way they first show it. It's a really kind of like,
it's grim.
It's a harsh twist in the story. Like it really like lurches you, and you're suddenly like, whoa. I thought we were on one track, and we're clearly on a different one.
Yeah, because he's also like so charming. His character's like so charismatic. Yeah,
and you believe that side of the story throughout the rest of the film. So by the time he ends up getting killed, which again could be accidental or sort of incidental or by voodoo curse, you're kind of like, oh, this fucking dude deserved it. That like if he's done this shit, he deserves it. And so him being redeemed somewhat beyond the grave kind of it sours
kind
it
of
even further. It's like, oh shit, he didn't deserve
But I like
this.
that it's left ambiguous. If they'd have said, "Oh no, this is actually what happened," I think the film would be much less interesting. But the girl basically says, "I can't remember like what I was doing," so it's kind of sort of left up to
it could be kind of halfway between both, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting what you said earlier about like the supernatural element of it could almost be seen as like nothing actually happens, and it's all just kind of superstition and people's preconceptions about curses and voodoo essentially sort of lead their actions into sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Because like the message of the film seems to sort of be like, what goes around comes around, and even though Samuel L. Jackson may well have actually been a somewhat more upstanding character than you initially think, and at least in regards to what happened with his daughter, he clearly didn't learn from that, and he still treats like the women in his life pretty poorly.
Yeah.
So it kind of seems like whether there's a curse or not, the way he dies is related to his infidelity.
Yeah. So
it is almost like always going to happen anyways, which I guess is quite interesting. But I just kind of wish that you could have cut out a lot of there's like this sort of mid portion of the film that just kind of loses its momentum, and it becomes they're all kind of hiding inside because they're scared of the curse, and it just kind of loses its momentum a bit. And I just wish this film was a little bit more trimmed, because I feel like if you emphasized all the most interesting parts about it and you trimmed out a lot of the more boring stuff, I feel like you could have like a really, really special film here.
I agree. I mean, yeah, and again, from my end, if it was a little more visually captivating,
sure, yeah,
then again, like, I think that's something that was a bit something we haven't really talked about much, but you mentioned earlier as well. The music, I think that's a big thing that lets this film down.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not terrible, but it's not great.
I would argue, on its own, the music isn't terrible, but I think what it does is completely screws up the tonal consistency of a scene. You'll have something really dramatic happening, or the dialogue between the adults and the children that's supposed to be serious, and you'll have this kind of playful, almost like stock music kind of playing. It feels way too high paced and chipper in comparison to like the quite serious drama of what's happening. And I wonder how much more impactful the film would have been if it had like more appropriate score going with it.
It's not so much the music, it's how the music is used.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a real like thing for me with films. Like, I hate when music is just kind of forced into a scene because the scene isn't that interesting by itself, and you just kind of like use because the scene isn't communicating the tone well enough, you just drop some music on top of it and hope that it seems a bit more, whatever it's going for, more romantic, more intense, more whatever.
Yeah.
This film definitely, it's not like the worst example I've ever seen, but the music is already not the best soundtrack I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And it is used a lot, like probably a bit too much. I mean, there are moments where it works, but it's just, it's one of those things that does kind of drag it down just a little bit.
100%. So Rupert, what do you reckon you would give Eve's Bayou?
I would give it a 6 out of 10. I think it was a pretty good film. I'd be interested in watching it again, because as I was watching this, I was like, I don't really like this that much. And then like as that sort of final bit came round, it kind of won me over that little bit more.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan of Samuel L. Jackson. I think it's one of his more interesting performances because he's been in so much stuff. This is kind of like an interesting spin on his classic charismatic swagger. It's kind of done in a more interesting and dark way,
and like more consequential. Like what would happen if you placed that kind of character in a real scenario?
Yeah, exactly. I kind of enjoyed the atmosphere of the film. So even with all of the faults I'm saying, like there was something kind of like interesting and different about it.
Yeah.
So 6 out of 10. Not the best film of Hooptober so far, but certainly one I'd be interested in revisiting at least.
One.
Yes.
I'm with you. A 6 out of 10 from me. We're back to scoring it exactly the same, which is all good. The world has returned to equilibrium.
I felt uncomfortable during *Malignant*. I was like, Adam, you don't have my opinion here.
As you say, it's captivating in its own way. There's certainly elements of it that I find to be a little dull or flat, particularly, as I've said, cinematography. But there's like a real intrigue and darkness to it, like dealing with, I guess, subtly feminist in some way as well. Like it focuses on like women in a way that I haven't necessarily seen done in quite the same way before. It's
like, because I guess it's all like a melodrama, and like we said, it's quite soapish, and also sort of a coming of age type film. And those are like the types of films that are often quite sort of had a high level of female interest. So I think it is quite appropriate that like most of the characters in the film are women. There's not actually even that many men outside of Samuel L. Jackson and some more sort of auxiliary characters on the side. So I think that was like a very appropriate casting choice.
No, I think it's interesting. I think the recontextualization of, say, sort of the feminist issues in this aren't blatant because the women aren't saying, "Oh, reclaim your right and reclaim your power in this dynamic because you're a woman, you're owed it." It's more of like,
I'm glad it didn't do that because
no,
boring.
Oh yeah, of course. No,
Yeah.
but I mean, like, if it had said it in so many words, it would have been a bit, pandering and disingenuous anyway. But I think that in centering it around the family, it kind of disguises it somewhat. It all becomes about like a greater good rather than a specific personal good. But also incorporating sort of this sort of black spirituality into the feminist argument, feminist discussions. Talking about being like cursed and like the paranoia that comes with, losing husbands and the way the culture around you perceives you, I think is really interesting. It's like a slightly new angle on a discussion that's been had for a long time, and so like that was something quite different I thought the film was running with.
So Adam, would you say this film is a more accurate portrayal of Haitian voodoo rituals than Plague of Zombies?
Well,
although I personally preferred A Plague of Zombies, I have to say this is probably a more authentic, because they were speaking French at points, right? So they were probably Haitian descended.
I'm not sure if they were Haitian descended or if like the Haitians and Louisianans were, all kind of arrived around the same time. That's a part of history I do not know.
We'll have to look that up afterwards. I think they might have been Haitian. If
okay.
So, this Hooptober list has had quite a high level relative to probably most other lists of Haitian voodoo.
Yes, you know what? And not only that, but double dose, like voodoo into voodoo. So there you go. Wow.
Fuck yeah.
I mean, that's as good a time as any to end this review. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did like our review, and you're a fan of Eve's Bayou, or you're intrigued to check it out, please give this video a like. If you disliked this video, please give it a dislike. If you're interested in more horror movie content, James Bond reactions, podcasts, whatever, please subscribe to the channel, or please consider. And we will catch you again next time for some other strange underground movie that will dig out of the trenches and see what's going on. I've been Adam.
I've been Rupert.
And we'll catch you again next time. Peace.
Peace.